the week that rewrote a career. Most careers don't change in a single moment. They change quietly over time. But sometimes, everything shifts within the span of a few ordinary days. This story begins with one such week. 97, a stretch of time that looked insignificant at first, yet quietly rewrote the direction of an entire career. At the start of that week, nothing felt unusual. The routine was familiar. The responsibilities were clear. Life moved forward on a path that had already been decided long ago. And in a world that rewards consistency, there was no obvious reason to expect change. But what makes this story matter today is how quickly clarity can emerge when awareness and timing collide. Most people move through weeks like this without noticing, because the signals are quiet and the routine is loud. The first shift was subtle. A conversation that lingered longer than expected. A question that didn't have an immediate answer. They brushed it aside at first, assuming it was just another passing thought. But something about it stayed. It followed them into the next day and the next, quietly challenging assumptions they hadn't questioned in years. Midweek, the tension grew. Small moments began to feel heavier. Tasks that once felt neutral now felt misaligned. They noticed how often they were operating on habit rather than intention. The realization didn't cause panic, 97, but it did create discomfort. A sense that something important was being revealed faster than they could process it. The ordinary rhythm of the week, which should have felt forgettable, was instead accumulating weight with each passing hour. By the third day, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Each experience seemed connected, pointing toward the same truth. The career they were maintaining had direction, but no longer had meaning. The momentum was real, 97, but it was no longer theirs. It belonged to a version of themselves that had made commitments years ago, and those commitments were still steering the present without being re-examined. They didn't know it yet, but this ordinary week was already doing its work. By the time it ended, nothing about their future would look the same. As the week unfolded, the sense of unease deepened. Each day added another layer of clarity they hadn't been seeking but couldn't ignore. A meeting that felt strangely hollow. A task completed without satisfaction. A moment of comparison that landed harder than expected. The accumulation was subtle, yet undeniable. They began replaying moments from earlier in their career, searching for when things had shifted, when purpose had given way to maintenance, when curiosity had been replaced by routine. The answers didn't arrive neatly, but the pattern became clear. The work still functioned, 97, but it no longer resonated. The conflict intensified when opportunity appeared midweek. On paper, it was exactly what they were supposed to want. Advancement, recognition, a logical next step. Accepting it would have reaffirmed everything they had been doing. But instead of excitement, they felt resistance. The opportunity belonged to the life they were already questioning. That resistance shocked them. For years, they had trained themselves to say yes, to move forward, to chase momentum. Now, hesitation felt foreign. Yet, the hesitation didn't feel like fear. It felt like honesty. By the fourth day, the weight of the realization pressed harder. They noticed how carefully they had avoided asking themselves what they truly wanted, how often they had chosen what was expected over what felt meaningful. The week was exposing a truth they had long postponed. They tried to regain equilibrium, to remind themselves of gratitude, of stability, of all the reasons not to disrupt what worked. But the arguments no longer landed. Once awareness takes hold, comfort loses its authority. The reassurances that always worked before suddenly sounded thin, because they were built on assumptions the week had already dismantled. The week wasn't dramatic, but it was decisive. Something irreversible was taking place. By the end of the week, the internal conflict reached its peak. The clarity that had been building all week could no longer be contained. Every attempt to return to routine felt forced, like stepping back into a role they had already outgrown. The career they once trusted now felt fragile, 97, not because it was failing, but because it no longer reflected them. The emotional weight surfaced in quiet moments. Late at night, early in the morning, times when distraction faded and honesty had space to speak. They imagined the months ahead unfolding exactly as planned. The image was clear, 97, and deeply unsettling. Nothing was wrong with it. That was the problem. It asked for endurance, not engagement. Fear entered the picture, but not the kind they expected. It wasn't fear of change. It was fear of staying. Fear of realizing years later that they had recognized the truth and chosen to ignore it. That fear carried more urgency than any risk the future could present. The tension sharpened when they recognized how quickly the weak had stripped away their excuses. They could no longer claim confusion. They could no longer say they needed more time. The evidence was everywhere, 97 in how they felt, in how they reacted, in how the work no longer energized them. Awareness had accelerated faster than their comfort could keep up. The emotional peak arrived with a simple, devastating realization. This wasn't a phase. It wasn't burnout. It wasn't temporary dissatisfaction. It was evolution. And evolution doesn't ask for permission. It moves forward regardless of whether the person experiencing it feels ready, and it does not wait for convenient timing or comfortable circumstances. They understood then that the weak hadn't changed their career. It had revealed it. The path they were on had always been moving away from who they were becoming. The weak simply made that truth impossible to ignore. And once seen, it demanded a choice. The choice didn't arrive with certainty. It arrived with acceptance. They stopped asking whether the realization was inconvenient or well-timed. It was simply true. And once accepted, it changed how they saw everything that came next. They didn't act immediately. The weak hadn't given them a solution. 97 it had given them direction. And direction, they learned, doesn't always come with instructions. What mattered was that they could no longer pretend the career they were maintaining was still aligned with who they were becoming. In the days that followed, the urgency faded, replaced by intention. They began making small, deliberate adjustments. Not escapes, not dramatic exits. Just choices that honored the clarity that week had revealed. Conversations became more honest. Commitments became more selective. The future stopped being something they inherited and started becoming something they shaped. Looking back, they would realize how rare that kind of week is. Not because it's extraordinary, but because most people move too fast to notice it. They dismiss discomfort. They explain away misalignment. They let momentum carry them forward without question. The signals are always present, but attention is a rare ingredient that determines whether they are heard. But this time, awareness arrived faster than avoidance. The week didn't force them to change everything at once. It rewrote the rules they lived by. From that point on, every decision was filtered through a new lens. Not what looks right, not what's expected, but what feels true. And that shift, 97 quiet, internal, irreversible 97 became the foundation of everything that followed. Not because it guaranteed a better outcome, but because it ensured that every future choice would be made with open eyes rather than inherited momentum. Sometimes a career isn't changed by a bold decision. Sometimes it's rewritten by a single week you finally pay attention to. Subscribe to join the journey. The week